glitches today. I don't think we will. Sounds like you got those out of the way. Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Tuesday. Got another new series for you, assuming that this LinkedIn is working. Yep, it's working.
All right.
So what's going on? I see you have Oaks as your name there. Should I forget about Joshua and just go with Oaks?
I answer to both. There are just I've run into a lot of other Joshes. And so I have typically rolled over into just straight last name in scenarios like that. So
That's
depends on
fair.
whether when we meet, you know another Josh or not.
Well, there you go. I'm cool with Oaks if you are.
Yeah, that's great.
How you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. It's going to be hot here today, so I'm trying to stay cool in front
Where
of that.
where is here?
I am located in Nashville. I'm originally West Coast, but in Nashville, Tennessee right now.
Okay, that's fair. I know it can get warm there too. It was 80 during my 5 a.m. morning walk today. So you always know you're in for a day when
Yes.
it's that early in the morning and we're at 80 degrees already.
These are the dog days here. I'm a gardener, so I pay attention to this stuff. And it's been a hot and wet summer, so it's been in the 80% humidity, heat index above 100 today. So I will not be in the garden. So if
Okay,
you,
we will be growing something somewhere else. How's that for a segue?
that is a great
Uh,
segue.
let's talk about growing audience. It's been kind of I'd say borderline, buzzwordy over the last year or so. Everybody's starting to understand the value of audience or eyeballs or just access to getting access to the market, access to people so that you can show them your stuff is ultimately a growing challenge right now as more and more people start to use these platforms and try to say their 2 cents. So I loved when you brought up the idea of this series in terms of um, it. Since we're dealing with people, we're trying to reach human beings with relevant information as often as possible. Lots of challenges there, but platforms like HubSpot can make it a lot easier, but it definitely requires some strategic thought on how to use all these tools successfully, especially when we're talking about aligning teams like marketing, sales, and service to always be aligned in the message with the same audience so that we build that consistent experience and build that value over time. So I think this is a great topic to hit on. Um, why was it, what are you seeing that kind of led you to being passionate about a topic like this?
Yeah, so it goes back quite a while to the early days of HubSpot, actually. And I'll mention in passing, uh, HubSpot, I think, is the best system out there right now for doing this kind of work. And so I end up working with a lot of clients that are HubSpot first. The For a couple of years, I was head of client services for a consultancy and then went independent and got called in to address or diagnose a lot of sales marketing, strategy, operations, systems questions. It'd be things like, why isn't this working? Or we don't understand our data, or what's up with our analytics? Or we look at our analytics and we think we're collecting the right data, but we can't make sense of it. And we would go in and solve those problems and then kind of step back and say, okay, look, you've now got this very robust end-to-end solution for what you're doing. How does that look? And the executive would invariably kind of squint and look at the data and the outcomes and ask some form of the question. So how come everything just didn't automatically work and fix itself now that our systems are integrated and we have measurement and all this stuff? And so we would roll our sleeves back up, dig back in, and find like, okay, sure, like you've got your end-to-end experience. Let's say it's a lead gen context. You've got content and ads running to quasi segmented like conversion experiences like targeted landing pages and forms, and you would bring them in to your nurturing automation or to your like scoring and then SDR process, sales process. You would close some of those deals and you would kind of be treating it like a traditional marketing funnel. But I would say, who do we think our audience is? Like, who are we targeting? Who's in the funnel? And you would get answers like, oh, small businesses, and I'd say like, well, okay, like a plumber or like a law office with 2 attorneys and 3 paralegals. And they say, no, small businesses. And I say, like, restaurants. No, 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 no. And like over and over from like startup size to massive healthcare companies, education, security, software, all of these industries. Um, they might have an ICP defined, but the company as a whole believes that they have an understanding of who they were trying to serve, but every single person whose job it was to serve that customer has a different view. And oftentimes the view is like very incomplete, like let's say there's 10 facets or something. Some of the most important people in that process might only have visibility into 2 of those, and nobody has visibility into all of those, and nobody agrees even what they are, much less what those 10 facets are, much less what kind of is the most important. So after doing engagements like that over and over and over, I was like, okay, we can solve the systems issue and the operations issue, but you're never going to get anywhere if we don't get a better understanding than like kind of LinkedIn Sales Navigator level filters of who your ideal customer is, right? Because if you have any direct competitors, and most organizations do, your ICP can't be the same as theirs, right? Your target customer can't be the same. There has to be something that you do differently or better that makes you more appealing to certain customers. And so, how do we double down on that and then scale it? So, like that led to the kind of framework from solving that problem over and over again, the who first framework, because we need to think about who first before we do anything. And so I kind of built this framework and started digging in, interviewing customers, and then putting together what tools were useful to guide that kind of understanding and application of it throughout the sales and marketing process.
Yeah, and once I saw, like, I love diagrams, and I'm definitely not afraid to get a little complex with them sometimes. I don't think we do that enough to tell good stories about these very complex systems that we have to set up to support the seemingly simplified versions of it. Really is simple as like decide who first. Like, now saying that, I will, as we go through this, I'm going to ask some questions about, you
Yeah.
know, like I've had some experiences where we went through a program of, engaging a partner, and we did all the interviews first, and we kind of did it in the right order. But then we get to the rest of the organization, and no matter how many times the customers said a certain phrase, it's like, oh, we can't say that, or oh, we can't use that. We need to say it like this. That's too negative. Like, and like you start to miss the whole point of like doing the interviews and using customer language and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of where I've moved a little bit is, you know, finding ways to test and iterate like a little earlier. And collaborative content is one of the ways you can do that. Where, with this kind of LinkedIn Live activity, I noticed that, I knew everything was, and this is where I think the shortcut is just getting the right people in the organization involved, making sure they're aware and they have a voice throughout the process. But then, like, instead of kind of everybody filling out surveys or spreadsheets or, attribute lists or whatever you want to do it, it's like find a way to get them into conversation and then let kind of more objective means determine what's happening in the conversation, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's my reaction to that is a little bit outside of the scope, I think, of what we may want to cover today. But people talk about ICPs or personas or avatars or whatever. There's all of these terms. I use the term for the work that I do, audience profile, to call out how it's distinct from that. And it's distinct from those in four ways. I say your understanding of your customer needs to be four things: documented, validated, actionable, measurable. And if you haven't ever written anything down and everybody's operating from their own assumptions, which is like 99% of organizations out there, then you're clearly not documented. If you haven't taken what your either assumptions that you've kind of pulled on a whiteboard or interview findings and then presented them back to customers in like surveys or in post-purchase data gathering kind of contexts, then you haven't validated it, right? Like if you have a hypothesis, our customers are split between these three profiles, 80% of our customers are split between these three profiles, and we've got a 20% other. You ask some questions of people that put them on one of those profiles post-purchase, and then you find out like, okay, are we right? Which one is the biggest? Which one is the biggest from a revenue or from a count standpoint, et cetera. Actionable, right? Marketing persona templates that you see out there, I call them Mad Lib personas. Those are not actionable in any way, right? That's like, oh, we did all this work, and an agency might charge it 20 grand to do it or whatever, but like, but what, having the logos of what social media platforms they use on there is like, okay, it's like, oh, you put the CTO uses Reddit. Okay, so you're going to run ads for CTOs on Reddit. Oh, well, no. That's just so that we have a sense of who they are. It's like, well, then that's crap, right?
That tells you exactly who they are.
Right. And Measurable, we will touch on today a little bit. I will talk about this until 5 o'clock if you let me. But if you aren't putting converters, prospects in your CRM onto a profile when they convert or as you accrue enough data to know, and then report on that at the end, what's the point of even doing this as an exercise if you're not going to measure the outcomes, right? So being able to say, whatever, we closed 100 deals last month, and here's what the distribution of our profiles looks like among those deals. And so we might know that we invested 50% of our budget in what we thought was our biggest profile, but that only resulted in 20% of the revenue. Like, okay, is that a time issue? Is that just a misprioritization? Like, why are we not seeing the outputs that we would expect here, and what do we need to change as a result, right? So like, again, documented, validated, actionable, measurable. If you're doing all of those things to how you understand your customers, then you are 80% of the way there. And from there on, it's just fine tuning, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that's man, we always jump, or I feel people jump to things like attribution and all this stuff. And like what you just described, like most people aren't doing any of that, which means they have no idea what is actually happening right now. Like,
right.
So how could you possibly try to attribute? Like, so we just theorize these journeys. Meanwhile, the data of what's actually happening is sitting. If you're not great at CRM, it might not be there, but it's in someone's email, or it's in another system, or it's in the CEO or lead sales guy's head. Right.
Or in notes that a salesperson has taken from a call, right, that don't get stored anywhere.
Right. And that's where we come in here. It's like, that's what I love. Like, usually it's easier to get adoption if you can find what they're already doing and then say things like, you're already doing this here. I'm just asking you to do it over here instead. And when we do that, now all the things that you mentioned just are a lot easier to get done, because a lot of this, when you approach people and when they've been doing it for 20, 30 years, right, they do, like, they can't, like, write a document out, they can't describe it, but once they get into the conversation with people, they know all the pain points they have, they know how to operate. And I think that's the challenge that most people, we're trying to build a system that you can scale that so that it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be synchronous always, right? And that's where finding ways to get it out into a system. Now, this is not about replacing anybody, right? It's about giving you all the time that you want to be spending on all the personalization activities and the relationship building and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely come at it from a marketing side, but I am uh, uh, anyone who has worked with me who is watching this is going to chuckle when I say this. Uh, I am equally critical of marketing as I am of the sales teams when I go in there. And my main criticism of the sales team is like, you are not giving marketing what they need to help you better. And my main criticism of marketing is typically you aren't doing enough to help sales, right? Um, the and you know, I go in and I help companies sort out the marketing side, the like ops, the strategy, the tech, all of that stuff, and I try not to be, total greasy hands on that, but um, we will fix a bunch of stuff, including attribution. But ultimately, what I say is like, look, you know, you want to know, like, did they come from Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or Reddit or something else? Like, that's great because you are trying to decide where to put budget. But like, functionally, myself excluded, everybody is on Facebook and Instagram, right? And then maybe like my kids. But um, so, if you're trying to decide, like, well, that is not a criteria that is helpful to figure out if you are reaching the right audience, right? It's different measurement that you need to be thinking about. Um, because if the size of the audience of Facebook means that, like, um, that if somebody finds you, or maybe a better way to say it is, nobody becomes a customer because they found you on Facebook and not Instagram, or on Reddit and not Facebook, or whatever, right? Like, if they aren't on one of those platforms, then sure, it's a gating criteria. But
Right.
that is typically not an influence on their purchase, right?
Right. They
Um,
became a customer because they found you, like,
Right.
period.
And you
Right.
happen to do something right if you aren't thinking about this, like you got lucky.
Right.
And stepping back from getting lucky and being deliberate about what supports that journey is what the whole focus here is, right? And you
Right.
mentioned adoption being an issue, right? And the thing that I see, whether it's a brand new HubSpot customer or somebody who's been using it for 5 years and has never had somebody like actually put eyes on it, or they've been using it for, early days, 10 years, and they've transitioned to admin, is the this is a left to right diagram of like roughly a customer journey, and then split between marketing and sales, the high level tools in HubSpot specifically that you would put into practice, and then a staged graph of like how much you know about an individual customer as they progress through this, or could know about an individual customer as they progress through this journey.
I love it.
The
And that's
the
like,
Go
that's
ahead.
such a key piece. Like,
Yeah,
if you build this out in a way where your knowledge in this case can build on itself like this, that's the only way you get a sustainable,
right.
understanding that doesn't, because what we see when the system's not built out, or people aren't using it or they're not used to using it, like, instead of this, you're in the moment usually every month, some manager, like exporting data, building slides. They're rebuilding the story every single month.
Yes.
And that's such a hard part, or at least for me. It's been to kind of explain that in a way like, if we can reduce that piece, now you actually have time for
Right.
real insightful understanding of what's happening. Right.
Right. And a critical, like the dimension of this is like this stair step graph is, if you want to be reductive, is um, represents data points collected about a customer along the journey. Um, the other part of restarting like this, it's like, oh, we're every month or quarter we're redoing our analysis, and this month we're getting asked about show rate of meetings or something, right? And last quarter we were being asked about like cost per lead, and the quarter before that the main focus was whatever holiday campaigns, right? um, that that constant shifting is a challenge, and if you get your fundamentals right, then that stuff becomes a lot easier. But also on this journey of a single customer, you are often, as a as an individual contributor trying to support that customer, you are also starting over, and you shouldn't need to be. And that's the whole point of this here, right? Like, here's a thing that I have heard so many times, particularly on the sales to service or success handoff, that I've heard on both sides of the table, as coming in as an advisor and also as a purchaser of, like multi six figure contracts. Is you spend all of this time qualifying with a sales rep and a sales engineer, and you do a test deployment and you do an import and you build out a pilot, and you're like, okay, I think we're good to sign on this. And like, can you help us as part of the SE process, like pull this over into our production environment, or this sandbox environment in production rather than this pre-sales environment? They're like, yes. They're like, let's get you connected with your account manager, your success rep. And they first call with a success rep, they say, so, sales guy like kind of told me like what your goals are and stuff, but I would really like to hear it from you. And you're like, I have been talking to you for 9 months. Like, is there not a notes file somewhere in my record? Like, what are we doing? Um,
Yeah. And
it
that's sort of like,
infuriates me, right?
yes.
Obviously. But
And
like, that
I'll
process
say
started
this.
here, right? And
Right.
like all throughout this, right? Like they had they had an opportunity to keep track of what I was telling them my priorities were. I come in there like with the list, like, here are my objectives: 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Here's my budget. Here are my resources. Here's everything. It's like, oh, tell me what you want to accomplish. Um, so
Yeah.
like
And I've
from an
heard like,
adoptions, go ahead. Sorry. I'm
yeah,
really excited.
no, like it's so true. And but one thing that's been interesting, it's like all of this, like if we're a customer or your customers, and this is where I say, like, you know, I've come around to the concept that every business is different, but it has nothing to do with the product or service they provide and their customer base. Like customers always want the same things. They want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they want to have their expectations met. And as long as you, let's say you're the customer success person, like there's value in getting people to talk about things in different ways at different points in the journey. But if you come at me with a blank slate, and I know that you should have data so that you can at least say, hey, I've seen or I've heard, I watched a call, like like this and this came out of it, but I would love you to dig into that more, or like some kind of, I've heard you already, right? That's
Right.
all we want.
Right. Right. The knowledge of saying like, I know that I can see that your four priorities are these things, and one and two, it looks like we're well on the way. I think we're 80/20. Number four, it's not for 8 months, and so I'm not worried about it right now. Let's talk about number three, and here's my specific question about it, right? Like if that call that I'm describing, and that's a specific call, would be And that was also a very, the product was, it was a big, expensive product. Um, but it has a very like regimented implementation approach. And the technology is like not really flexible, it just is what it is. So it's not like, they were trying to just, there wasn't a lot to deduce, right? Um, if they had come in like that, I would be using them as like a great example rather than an anti case study.
Right.
Um,
And
and
that's where, like,
the
honestly, like, not to confuse what's happening on the bottom, this isn't like any kind of data that just aggregates to create the understanding. You can certainly collect a bunch of data and stay at this like bottom level of understanding
right,
the customer. And then when you get to the brain, you can't learn anything.
right,
It doesn't
yeah,
feed back and there's no action to be taken. And it's just like pretty dashboards, right?
right, exactly. So an example of that, since we're running up on time, or maybe an illustration rather than an example, is the let me think about what we want to hit. Well, let me say this, like the whole point of this series, and oops, sorry, get my menu out of here, of this series and my methodology is that you, we run customer acquisition activities, right? And if maybe you're just getting started, you haven't thought about this, or brute force or whatever, if your marketing and sales activities are just like, hey, we have product X, if you like something like product X, you should buy from us, this is not for you. You should go to like Business 101 or watch some YouTube videos or something. But if you are doing your acquisition right, you are reaching out with messaging that you have a reason to believe resonate with either, and who first we call this tiger or trophy. They are either maximum, trying to maximize their opportunity. They're deciding to make a change because they're trying to achieve something, that's a trophy, or they are running from something that they are afraid of. That's a tiger, right? Um, there's neuroscience behind this too, and there's two other dimensions which we won't get into. But even at the basic level of, we ran an ad that was oriented around maximalization, um, messaging, right? Like, if you buy our product, you can achieve X. Um, the customer submits a form and they get some marketing emails, and like, let's say they eventually get into the sales process and the sales team has a meeting with them. um, if you have two ads, one that's running achievement oriented and one that's running pain avoidance oriented messaging, um, maybe in one individual conversion, it may not necessarily be accurate, but on the whole, if you are using, for example, your conversion experience to collect additional context about who this customer is, what they may be motivated by, what they are trying to achieve, then you can use that information in all of these tools throughout this process to better equip your business to serve them and to thereby serve them better at the very basic level of like, what kind of marketing email messages and automations should we send? Should we be sending them, hey, here's achievement oriented messages and here's how people have achieved things with our product, versus here's how people have avoided the kind of pain that you have expressed, being afraid of or actually experiencing, right? So that instead of, what most adoption with every tool looks like is just use the defaults, right? So it's like, oh, create a form, all right, first name, last name, email, phone number, maybe company, right? And then your marketing emails and workflows are just one message that goes to everybody. And maybe if you're super sophisticated and have been doing this for a long time, maybe you have two, right? And it's like, well, this form goes to this workflow and this one goes to this. But again, form doesn't matter, right? Can we put a profile on a person that follows them throughout this? And if it's wrong, we correct it, so that the emails and the tools that we present are better targeted for them, so that when a salesperson, when their lead score bubbles up and passes a threshold and the salesperson reaches out, the playbook, which Madeline is talking about in a couple of hours here on Let's Build Daily, so tune in for that. But you can insert even just the, you cannot call them audience profiles, but you can include their audience profile right in the playbook. So when the rep opens up the playbook, it says this person belongs to, you know, one of my internal profiles is team building marketing exec. So
I love
so you
that.
open the playbook and it's like, here's who this person probably is. And then one of the key components, internal tools of Who First is an audience hub, where internal resource that has all of those things, all of your documentation and examples and data. And you can have a link in the playbook to that. So that's like, oh, team building marketing exec. Right. Okay. Now I know who I'm talking to. Right. And you can contextualize your questions. You're not totally in the dark as like, well, this is just some lead that has a score of 57, and so now I know I'm talking to them, and my first question isn't, tell me about your goals, right? And they're like, I downloaded all your PDFs. Like, what do you mean, tell me about your goals?
Yeah.
Right,
No,
and so
that's
on.
where like
So
this stuff is so powerful, and it sounds like you're kind of touching on things like documentation in a way that like empowers whoever's interacting in that moment to be actionable,
yeah,
with the understanding that the data is already giving you if you want to look at it, right? And in that moment, that's where like throughout this process, it's not like, okay, we're gonna hypothesize over here, and then we're gonna document over here, and then we're gonna measure over here, like
right,
creating the iterative approach. So in that
right,
call, when they use that document, since you're using a structure like playbooks, you can measure more stuff, and it's kind of like it's in the process, right? You're not asking people to do
right,
extra work because you just want to understand this piece of data because you want to,
right.
right?
Yes, exactly. Right. And just as an example with playbooks, right? Like at HubSpot, you have to have sales enterprise, but um, if you have a discovery call where the main point is to diagnose that, figure out like, okay, what's their profile, because there's a lot of dimensions to what actually belongs in a profile. Sometimes it'll be things like what level in an organization that they're at, but primarily it's like, what's their desired future outcomes, what's their current state, what's their motivation, that's the Tiger Trophy. What are there's a traps gates, there's all these facets of an audience profile. So if you have like a diagnostic call like that, where it's like, okay, let's figure out what this looks like, that is a playbook that has the properties inserted, right? On Sales Enterprise, you can insert the actual properties that need to be twiddled when you find them. So it's like, okay, what's their motivation? Choose it from the drop down. Which of our known desired future states is this, right? And you can build all of that data right within the playbook, save it, and then you can trigger some workflows off of that now. Um, but even like, DealTags is on here. This is the high level HubSpot tools, right? And a lot of people might be like, DealTags, that's not high level, but it's the number one thing that when I work with a sales team, I just throw some, like, what I always do is throw aging, figure out how long a deal, when it qualifies as aging, and then I throw an aging tag on there, and then figure out what their other couple of dimensions that they really focus on. Throw some tags on there, and it's like you just bought yourself 6 months of goodwill from the sales team, because they're like, "This is amazing. When I look at my pipeline, I can actually see what's there." And you're like, "Yeah, I'm a wizard." Um, it's not that
It
hard.
feels that way sometimes.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, talk about like, that's the kind of value that people love. So imagine like looking at the sales team, looking at their pipeline and being able to identify like, okay, who are my, or just like opening a deal in the left-hand column and being like, oh, okay, this is pain avoidance. And we just shipped a new piece of content or whatever that would be relevant for all my pain avoidance people. It's not a like, I can remember the last 3 people that I would send this to. It becomes a, we are producing content specifically for these audiences, and now I have an easy way to filter, grab them out of my pipeline, and have a touch point with all of them, and a reason to try to reactivate people who are slowing down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And that's the
so
kind of stuff like when we start doing this in a system and like, cause you could, like, I've seen similar things like aging, like in a spreadsheet and you're having to update it, like with it in the system, like the daily, weekly, monthly conversations change so that everybody comes to these meetings with the same information, having
yeah,
already reviewed it. Now we can say things like, look, this one is quite old. It's supposedly in like smack dab in our ICP.
right.
Either that is not our ICP or they're not in it, or we've missed something here. And you
Right.
start to get really fine tuned with, instead of having these gray area conversations about, well, this company might be a little bit different, or, they said this, and like, because we're never gonna, that's the opposite of actionable, right?
Yes. Yeah. Like if you have to draw conclusions from just the raw data yourself, like ain't nobody got time for that, right?
Yeah.
But another facet of like what you pointed out there is like the when you do not pay attention to these kind of differences, in your customers, a lot of people will segment like, oh, based on industry size or based on company size or whatever. And it's like, okay, those, yes, sure. But if you do not if you don't go in, do the homework, figure out like, okay, we have this. Most businesses have between 3 and 5 audience profiles. If you're really large, then a division might have that many, or a product might have that many. But if you have fewer than 3, you're wrong. If you have more than 5, you're probably overthinking it. You definitely don't have one, and that's what most companies make, one, and are like, okay, great, and they put it on Dropbox or whatever and never look at it again. Um, but if you don't have that view into the differences among your customers, you would not be able to spot commonalities like, and I see this all the time, like, oh, we think our average deal velocity is whatever 34 days, and then you find out like, oh, there is like a meaningful distinction among our profiles in that. Like once you've collected the data, you go and look and you're like, this is a small, uh, we've been indexing on like our fast deals close in 21 days. And you're like, oh, actually that is true, but that is a meaningful but small profile, right? That's like 15% of your customers. And it's not the velocity that makes the difference. It's the audience profile. It's what they are trying to do. It's their context that makes the 21-day velocity happen. But when you circle that in your analysis over here, you realize like, okay, we we need to keep serving them, but if we invest a ton in serving just that profile, we can't grow it, and we can't accelerate it. So like, let's just make sure we don't screw it up, and let's try to focus on the folks that are 40 days that are pulling that 21-day average up into the 30s, because that's the biggest chunk of our revenue. And now that we can recognize of um, improvement, right?
Yeah. And like, I think that's, man, this is going to be a fun series. I think this is a good place to wrap. Hopefully, like we can give you tools like this, things to think about, because really, at the end of the day, in most organizations, this is a mindset shift of some sort. There's change management involved because in order to get to things like clear 21-day cycles versus 40 days, you have to have people creating deals at the same times in the sales process and things like that. So we know it's going to feel a little ocean boily, if you will. But the fact is, it's like if you understand that you know how beneficial it is to be top of mind every day for people, and you want to find a way to get to that place in your mind, in their mind, you have to be active every day. You have to be in front of them every day. There is a way to do that, but it's got to be very strategic in order not to overburden the organization. And because the other thing we don't want you to do is to decide that you're just going to start doing this. The team doesn't get the tools, the training, the enablement that they need, and they just get overwhelmed, all the customer facing teams, by trying to serve, these new buyer expectations, which really aren't that new. Uh, but I'm going to love digging into this with you. I think this is an important topic. Love, digging into behavioral analysis and all of the science that is behind this, because there's a lot. Like, this is, I mean, the beautiful thing about this stuff is when you get it, like, there's so much proven about why this works, about why you can trust it, about how it works. Like, you don't have to overthink it, and that's a common way, people will get in the way. So this has been a great start. I think, soon it'd be cool to look at like a finished, example of like an audience profile, and then we can start, kind of filling in the gaps in between. So until next week, everybody, take a look at your customer data. You take a look at some customer conversations to get started. Are we targeting the right people? What's changed? What do we like? What do we don't? Find the opportunity and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.